Sophia Laukli, welcome to the Single Track Podcast.
Thank you.
We were just talking offline that we have a mutual Maine connection. You grew up, I think, in Yarmouth. I was based in Cape Elizabeth, and anytime I meet a fellow Mainer, it's awesome on this scene. And so maybe talk a bit about what life was like growing up there and how that contributed to what we'll ultimately talk about, which is your passions, Nordic skiing and mountain running.
Yeah, totally. So I think, since you are familiar with Maine, it's maybe not like the most conducive area for trail running and Nordic skiing. So like part of it, both of my parents were skiers, and so that kind of already had me in the skiing world. And I went to Yarmouth High School, which had a very like legit high school program, and so it was nice to have that to really get me into the sport, because the rest of Maine, like now that I've skied with kids from Vermont and New Hampshire, like it's definitely a bit more, they have a lot of clubs and a lot of programs in those other states. And so it was definitely, I would say, a bit more of a struggle to like really take the next level with skiing, just because Maine didn't have necessarily most programs going on. With that being said, though, like I grew up, I've been skiing since I was 2 or 3, and I have my dad's from Norway, so I had that connection. And then I guess like with the trail running aspect, I didn't really get into it in Maine, I would say, because I lived on the coast. There wasn't a ton of cool trails to go on, and then I started going out west to train for skiing more, and that's when I like really got like eyes were open with what trail running could be, because I definitely like remember back in high school I was big into soccer, and I ran 1 year of cross country and kind of hated it because it was just like golf course running and I don't know, not too exciting. And so I was a little bit turned off from running at first, and really stuck to skiing. But then because skiing involves a lot of running for training, and then I got that exposure to these cool trails out west, that's kind of what solidified it. Yeah.
Cool. And, we do also share a mutual connection in Salt Lake City, and we'll talk about that in a second. But just a little bit more on the Maine scene.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think you're totally correct that the southern Maine, Portland area probably isn't the most conducive to Nordic, but it's interesting that folks like yourself, and then she's closer to my age, but if you're familiar with Claire Egan, who was an Olympic biathlete, also raised in the area and competitive, and a couple other folks that I went to high school with, like Elise Moody Roberts was really great back in the day, and if you go way back in time, like Joan Benoit Samuelson. So it's interesting that there's this tradition of great athletes like yourself coming out of the area, despite maybe the landscape not being like the perfect grounds like, a place like Utah is.
Yeah, I think, I'm almost grateful for it because I know like Claire too, we both kind of started taking skiing more seriously like a bit later. And I think she was like after high school, but I was like my junior, senior year that I really started getting into it. And I think because of that, like it's just been a bit more sustainable that I wasn't like in 5th grade just grinding all year. And so because I got to it later, I think like I was able to explore all these different things and then really set in on skiing. And I also think, I know like Claire, I'm assuming had the same situation where it was like a lot of training on your own and it took a lot of like self-motivation, and I found that to play a really big role in like where I am today, learning to like find that drive when you don't always have people around you to push yourself. So like even though Maine maybe didn't have the greatest environment for skiing and like the greatest opportunities, like I think it also played really big roles in my success now.
So it sounds like in middle school and high school, you weren't a one-track mind or a one-track athlete, like you dabbled in other sports and there was a lot of balance.
Yeah, I was pretty big into soccer and especially middle school. And I don't know, I played like tennis and lacrosse. Like I always skied in the winter, but it was never like I never trained outside of the season, I guess. And now like my whole year is basically ski training. And so Yeah, I think there was definitely, my parents were my coaches in middle school, which was a little bit of a challenge with skiing.
Yeah.
And I think that also made me want to test out other sports because I wasn't sure how I like felt about actually wanting to pursue skiing. And then when I got to Yarmouth High School and like found like that team was definitely a key aspect in me wanting to pursue it after high school. It was just such a cool community. So yeah.
I'm admittedly uneducated in this part of the world, like the Olympic development programs and stuff, but I think I had this stereotype in my head that from the age of 5, an athlete like yourself was identified, and then you just
Yeah.
go all in on that sport to the exclusion of everything else.
Yeah.
And that would explain why you are where you are at age 20, 22, etc.
Mhm.
But it's pretty cool that you, and I'm sure there's a lot of other folks, you can be this well-rounded athlete dabbling in a bunch of stuff, and then when you determine the time is right and you want to invest, you can flip that switch
Yeah.
in college, for example.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I don't know if that's possible with every sport, but I think with Nordic skiing especially, like I've talked to a lot of other athletes and how their experiences with other sports has totally helped them today. And not completely setting their sights on it and when they were in elementary school. I
Yeah.
think, I mean, there's plenty of skiers who did do that and they're doing very well today too, but there's definitely like a lot of routes you can take.
Right. One more thing before we close the book on your background in Maine. I do, for a second, want to spend some time propping up the Northeast mountain running ski scene because I think that like areas like Sunday River and Sugarloaf are
Yeah.
cool, and the White Mountains in New Hampshire, the Appalachian Trail, Mount Katahdin. Have you spent any time in those mountains? I know that they're like an hour and a half, 2 hours
Yeah.
drive from Portland, but yeah, talk about that experience.
I definitely spent quite a bit of time at Sugarloaf. I mean, I skied there in the winter, and then I started spending some more summer time there, and like those mountains are definitely pretty great to run in. And same with like New Hampshire, I like Franconia and that area. I think when I was full time living in Maine, I was still at a point where I wasn't super psyched on running, and so I didn't get to explore it. But now, like, I have spent more time in Vermont training, sometimes in the summer.
Hmm.
And that's when I started to run, I guess, more in like the New Hampshire area and actually appreciate that there is quite a good scene here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it true? I'm trying to rack my brain here. Isn't there some sort of Olympic program up in Presque Isle? Like maybe that's where Claire trained with biathlon, something like that?
Yeah, I honestly am pretty unfamiliar with it. I think it's more biathlon oriented.
Okay.
I was always kind of turned off by going super north in Maine just because it's like absolute middle of nowhere.
I know.
Not a whole ton to do. So, I mean, I've been there, Fort Kent too, in the winter, and like the skiing is phenomenal there. But I never like did a lot of training there in the summer. But there definitely is a pretty legit program.
Well, if you look back at maybe the first 20 years of your life, even before college, are there any particular things that you would pinpoint that were setting you up to be an elite athlete, this Olympic level athlete that's not just at the top of Nordic skiing, but as we'll talk about in a second, very quickly rising up the ranks on the trail scene too?
I think, yeah, I just think not. That's a great. I think like the fact that I was able to have, or I like grew up in this environment that wasn't so hardly focused on skiing has made it possible now for me to be like, I just appreciated that really strong balance. And I had so much going on outside of the skiing realm that
Yeah.
now I have an easier time like fully focusing on skiing, but realizing how much I benefit from having other things going on outside, because I do know there's been some points where I'm all in with skiing and training, and I can't really sustain that. Growing or like getting into the sport when I had other things going on, that just it helped me come up with a plan that I guess allowed me to be where I am today.
transitioning just a little bit, I know that you started at Middlebury College, which, from what I understand, has a great endurance sports tradition, but you ultimately made the jump to the University of Utah. And I'm curious, was that largely motivated by the fact that maybe there were more opportunities from a competition standpoint at the Division I Nordic level?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about skiing is it's pretty small sport, so we actually all compete against each other.
Cool.
So like D3 schools, the skiing is still technically D1. So Middlebury was D1 for skiing, but it was a D3 school. And that's mainly the reason I ended up switching, was because like where I ended in high school, like Middlebury was definitely the right call. I wasn't like racing on the international level by any means. And so my first 2 years there were great. And then I ended up making like huge jumps in my results and just needing a bit more support because I was traveling a lot. And that's when the D3 aspect of Middlebury kind of held me back. And why I decided to go to Utah is just, even though like my competition wasn't really changing, the resources at Utah are just incredible, and the women's team there was incredibly strong. And that's, I mean, like most other sports, like training with people that are better than you and can push you, that's like the way to get better. And that for me was what drew me. And then obviously there's other benefits, like the just insane support and resources at Utah is it was very eye-opening, coming from a place like Middlebury, because
what are some of the differences in sorry to interrupt, what are some of the differences in resources?
I mean, because Middlebury's D3, like the academic side is definitely the priority, and
Okay.
I like initially went into college with that, but where skiing was taking me is I like needed some more flexibility, and I did want to continue my education and get the degree, and so going to a school like Utah, you have a ton of like athletic and academic support, like navigating missing school. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've been basically remote too, like they have a lot more online offerings. And then beyond that, there's just like PTs and psych and nutritionists and like great strength coaches, which like just a school like a D3 school doesn't have the resources to provide that for their athletes. And so that has just been pretty, for someone who is definitely focusing a bit more on my athletics, to have a school that can also provide those aspects was pretty key.
Very cool. And I apologize for all the basic questions, but this is primarily trail running audience, and I'm absolutely fascinated. This is very cool, and I was just curious. But
yeah. So
with a school like Utah, is it pretty common for athletes in the program to think about things differently in Olympic year? Because I know that you mentioned again offline that you're still in school. I think you have a year left. But you competed in the Tokyo Olympics, and so maybe walk us through how that opportunity came about and what adjustments you have to make in your day-to-day and like your college life to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, something that was pretty cool is there were 2 other Utah skiers who ended up going as well, and we were all like, it was cool that we had other people to relate to. We were all in the same boat, trying to like fight for these limited spots, and the fact that 3 of us ended up going, it was very cool. And then there was, a couple other college kids too that went, and I think it was nice. Like I didn't really have to change much with school. Like I was totally online to begin with. And what's interesting with the like Nordic skiing side of or Olympics is that there's not like one qualifying weekend or qualifying race, and so it was since like November through a week or a few weeks before the Olympics, it was definitely like a pretty stressful time. We were all like, each race we did mattered, and we all knew that. And I noted like it was very easy to pick up on based off of racing a bit last year on the World Cup, how much more pressure there was going into races, and trying to like navigate and balance that with your teammates, not just on Utah, but like on the U.S. team as well, because we all had the same goals. And so it was definitely a much more exhausting year mentally, with the racing aspect for the lead up to the Olympics. But yeah, I guess with like Utah playing a role with that, they were just so supportive because they wanted their athletes to get the opportunity to go. And so everyone that I worked with at Utah was making all the efforts to make it work.
You said something interesting there, and this question just came to mind. You said that in the lead up to the Olympics, every single race mattered, and you're still very young in your athletic career. And I'm always fascinated by folks like you because you tend to deal with pressure, I think, a lot better than the general population. And I'm curious what your strategies are for mentally preparing yourself for each of these races, knowing that there's a lot hanging in the balance. And I'm just curious, is that something that comes naturally to you, or are you working on it with like sports psychs?
I would say it's more natural. Like, I've done so much racing now that I know there's a lot in your control, but there's a lot out of your control, and like you will have bad races and you'll have good races, and I think it's hard to like, I had a hard time with some of the races that like I was really excited about. They were the distance or techniques that I'm normally better at, and so dealing with just the expectation of doing better in those, and then that not always living up, just learning how to like, I guess, process the fact that it's like not a fully consistent sport. I think, yeah, I guess just with the mentality, even though every race did really matter, and a lot of the times you will be let down with your result, not necessarily because it's like a bad performance, but in this particular year, like you needed to do well. And no, so
that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It makes total sense because like in our sport, and I'm more focused on like the 100K, 100-mile distance, 50-mile distance stuff where just because of the nature of the events, athletes are racing 2, 3, 4 times a year at most.
Yeah.
And a lot is hinging on those, but the way you describe it, there's a significant mental benefit, it seems, to having the ability to race often and not put too much focus or pressure on any one specific performance because you're going to have a lot of shots on goal.
Yeah, that's something like I'm just now that I'm more familiar with some other runners, and I'm used to racing like 3 times a weekend or every weekend throughout the winter. And I'm talking to them and they're saying that they're doing 3 or 4 races a year. And like that to me is like, that would be crazy to have to, like, you're looking forward to these 4 races. And so, yeah, I'm sure it's way harder to deal with a letdown or going into that race just so much more nervous because you don't have as many opportunities to show what you've been working on.
Tell us a bit about how Tokyo went for you. Like, what events were you competing in, and how did everything turn out? Yeah,
it was honestly not. I was there for 3 weeks, and I only ended up racing once, and so it was a little bit tough because I went. The thing with there were like 8 girls, and no one had like guaranteed starts, and so I went as an alternate for quite a few of the races, and that's why I was there the whole time. And my like specialty with skiing is the distance races, and so we got 4 starts for all the distance ones, but I ended up only getting the 30K start, which was on the very last day of the Olympics. And so I had these 3 weeks where I was just trying to stay motivated for that race. And I mean, it was definitely pretty COVID strict, and so dealing with maintaining that motivation was definitely a challenge. But at the same time, I was just like the 30K, it was a skate race. And that was just, the combo was perfect. Like I was so excited for that race. And the courses I had been training on the whole time, and they suited me super well. And so I definitely, like, I was able to stay excited the whole time. And then the day came and it was horrendous weather. It was like the windiest thing I've ever raced in, and I've never worn so many layers in a race. And it was probably one of the gnarliest races I've done, but it was very, like, the whole lead up was pretty surreal because I didn't really want to, or I don't think I fully let it sink in really until I was actually racing, because there were so many things that could go wrong, and all I wanted to do was get the opportunity to race once. And so that was like the biggest challenge for me, was letting myself embrace that I was actually getting to race at the Olympics. And so I do remember like standing on the start line and then the gun going off and just kind of having a sigh of relief that I got that opportunity. And the race itself did go pretty well. I had like a great result, and then I ended up doing a little mess up at the end and going, because it was like a lap course, so we were doing quite a few laps, and I was just very tired at the end and accidentally missed the finish line. And I lost a couple places, but I know that's happened before and people have lost medals, and so I was happy that was not my scenario.
It's common in trail racing too.
Yeah,
well,
I just did it this past weekend. I raced whiteface and went the wrong way, which was not ideal.
And we'll talk about it in a second, but still managed a podium too.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I have a couple more questions on the Nordic front. I'm curious because, Olympics only happen once every 4 years, sometimes 5 years if there's a pandemic.
Right.
Are you committed already to the next Olympic cycle? And if so, how do you prepare for something that's so far away? Like,
yeah.
Do you think about just like the gravity of that it's 4 years away? And just talk about that.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, what I took away from this Olympics was like, it was pretty cool. Like, I appreciated the fact that I was going, and I was going with zero expectations from myself or anyone else. Like, there was no pressure to get a medal or really on any result specifically. And I was grateful for that, but coming out of that, I was like, I want to come back and I want to actually have the goal, like more specific goals, like whether, I don't know where I'll be in 4 years, but it would be crazy cool to have the goal of medaling. And so in that sense, I became like much more motivated to go 4 more years. And it is definitely a bit daunting because, yeah, like the ski training, it takes a lot of sacrifices. Like I've found balances and how to make it more sustainable, but it's still like life is pretty revolving around my training, and I do feel like I'm giving some stuff up in that sense. 4 more years, it's a long time, and so I go back and forth with like my motivation for that, but I am definitely pretty committed to at least going 4 more years.
What are the biggest sacrifices in the process, in your opinion, that you grapple with?
I think just like the training for Nordic skiing is so niche that you have to be in like a very specific like a place. Like there's very few places in the US where you have what you need for roller skiing and running, and like, I mean, mainly the roller skiing is the challenge, to find a place that has solid roller skiing, because that's the basis of your summer training. And like, it's basically May 1st through March 31st is completely like, you got to make all your decisions for skiing basically. And I'm big on travel. I'm big on like doing socially things, and for me that's been a hard part to give up, because like, yeah, right now I'm in Vermont and it's phenomenal training, but Vermont is pretty isolated.
Yeah.
And so I yeah, I guess like earlier this summer, I did quite a bit of training to kind of get out or traveling and doing more of the things that I would want to do if I weren't skiing. And because like those months of the year they're important, but it's more important to dial in your training this time in like early fall. So in that, yeah, it's been nice to figure out a way to better balance it and get what I feel like I've been giving up, but I still get a taste of it. And so that's definitely helped.
Yeah. Is this something that, well, if you're looking at the playbook for an aspiring Olympic medalist in your sport, is this something that you need to do full time, or are you able to balance this with other projects and like returning to school or taking on a job? Talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, most other skiers I know, we all have something else going on. I think we do it for like the sake of having distractions, and like if skiing isn't necessarily going well, then you have other like motivators and things to put your energy into. And I think whether it's like a job or school or just any other project, I know very few skiers that don't have that going on, because we've realized like it plays a big part. And so I don't know what I'll do, because I guess I only have one more year of school. But I will want to find something else to balance my time with. Yeah.
Well, when and where does mountain running come into the picture for all of this? Is this something that it's common for Nordic athletes to supplement with because it provides a certain beneficial training stimulus, or does it come from a place of just like fascination and joy?
Yeah, I think, no, it definitely, we do a lot of trail running for just in our summer training, and I always, like, I think it's not necessarily like I don't really love to mountain bike or road bike, and that's also another training that a lot of skiers do. And so I would always really look forward to the trail runs we did, whereas other people would look forward to the bike rides. And I think I never really considered the racing aspect. I always just enjoyed running. Or I guess when I moved, like I think I mentioned this before, but like moving out west and actually seeing what like trail running and all the, like, what it actually meant and like the cool places you could go, that's when that was 2-3 years ago, I would say.
Okay.
And then I think I really kind of fell in love with it, but during COVID, and so there wasn't really a big racing scene. And so for me, it was still just a recreational activity. And then last summer, I was training in Alaska, and we do like easy runs, but we also do like running intervals, and I always enjoyed those. And so there's a pretty big trail running scene in Alaska, and so I did a bit of research and found some races and got into those. And yeah, I guess that was the true spark for trail running for me.
One of the recurring themes on this podcast, we take every chance we get to prop up the Salt Lake City trail running scene. So
yeah.
talk a bit about some of your favorite routes to train on, mountains to train on, stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess I'm still discovering new places because I just moved there last fall. But for one, like, it's pretty incredible to me that I can do these 3-4 hour runs straight from my door, and I live in downtown Salt Lake, and it's maybe like a 20-minute run to get to the mountain, but just like behind campus is forever trails.
Yeah.
And those are awesome because they're so convenient. But I think I've started to run a bit in Park City, and like those trails to me are just so fun. Just like I do. There's just the terrain is really fun, and I guess like I always thought Utah to be this dry, deserty place. But Park City I found to be just like incredible nature and incredible terrain of trails, and I would say that that's kind of my favorite place to run.
Cool. Well, at least as far as I can see in Ultra Sign Up, this has been your biggest year just from a pure racing standpoint in the sport. Like you you won the 26K at Broken Arrow, which is awesome, deep field. Podiumed at Whiteface. I think you did some Surf Series stuff in the past, and then you've got Flagstaff Sky Peaks on the docket later this year too. So I guess what I'm wondering, now that you've had a taste of the sport, are you like, I need to just, I can't get enough, like I need to keep investing, or are you still keeping it at an arm's length because, you know, the original vision is Nordic?
I know. I did not know that like, Broken Arrow to me, that was, like, I really enjoyed, like, the Cirque Series races last year were super fun. But Broken Arrow was definitely, like, a little bit of a turning point where I got really stoked on the idea of doing more of those types of races. I'd never done anything that long, and I was a little bit daunted going into it. But now I'm kind of more into that distance to really sink in on like the endurance aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm trying right now to like not get too excited, because I do know that I could definitely see myself like eventually committing to all like only trail running. But at like where I am right now, I am trying to focus, and I do want to focus a bit on skiing for at least through the next 4 years. But I feel like this year is kind of like an experiment of how to balance that with trail running, because I don't necessarily want to like give up these opportunities to race running. I just need to come up with a sustainable way to make both work. And so, yeah, I guess I'm going to hold back a bit on training or racing this first year. But yeah, there's so many cool opportunities and so many cool races to do.
I was going to say, because I know you're a Solomon sponsored athlete too.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you're aware of the scene over in Europe, like the races like Sears and all, and the Mount Blanc Marathon. Does any of that, could you see yourself doing any of that in these future summers?
Well, I actually am going to go do those this year. I'm going to do
this year?
Yeah. I'm going to do the one in Norway, Strandafjord.
Yes.
And then I'll do Sears and all, which are just, I know I'm just going to be over, like, past the tipping point there.
You're in it.
I know, yeah. I'm definitely really excited for the Sierra Zinal one. I mean, I'm just starting to, like, learn a bit more about the trail running world. And, I guess I didn't know how iconic of a race it was, but I'm really, really stoked for that one.
Well, I did want to ask you this, too. I'm curious how you are getting your education in the trail world, because I'm aware of a couple athletes in our sport that have crossed over from Nordic. Corrine, who I'm sure you're familiar with, is one of them. Yeah. Are you turning to folks like her for advice, or how are you doing this information gathering process when it comes to like training and stuff like that?
I honestly haven't like made a conscious effort. I think right now, like, it was really cool for me to meet, and because I was living with a group of Solomon athletes for Broken Arrow, and that was like my first exposure to actual other trail runners. And then just kind of speaking to other athletes after the race, like some of the other women, I still have a very minimal knowledge, so that's kind of like where I've gotten any information that I have now. So I haven't made like a true effort to learn, I guess. And yeah, because I guess I just don't really know where, but yeah.
What is a typical, like, you're in Vermont right now, it's the middle of the summer. What does a typical training week look like for you, like in terms of distribution? Like, are you spending X amount of hours on roller skates or I don't know, is it called roller skates?
Roller skis, yeah.
Roller skis. And then, like, I'm curious, like, what portion of your training right now is devoted to time on feet for trail running, especially for race like Sears and all, which, that's like, I mean, that's the Super Bowl right there.
Oh God. I mean, I'm trying to I haven't completely altered my training, for trail running. And I think I've found like a benefit to that for my running with like trying to maintain quite a bit of roller skiing in it, just so that I keep my legs fresh and try to like hopefully avoid injury. I found that to be very helpful. But I am doing like a bit more running intensity, but I would say hours wise, like I train close to 20-ish hours a week, and there's maybe like, I don't know, maybe 60-40 for, I do a bit more roller skiing to running. But like for Broken Arrow, I definitely like the week or two leading up, I shifted a bit more to running and doing more running intensity I feel like I'm consistently running throughout the summer, and so it doesn't take a lot for me to really get into running shape. But really dialing into the weeks closer leading up to the races is where I'll maybe start to alter my training a bit more. But
Gotcha.
For now, I'm definitely doing quite a bit of roller skiing. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Sophia, it has been great to chat. As a fellow Mainer, I'm stoked to see you on the scene, having all the success you've had. All I have left for you here is a rapid fire round of questions. The first, I'm putting you on the spot. I know you have dabbled in the short distance of trail running. Could you ever see yourself getting into an ultra? And I'm talking like 100K, 100-mile distance at some point in your career.
Yeah, it's funny that question, because to me, like 20, 30K is long distance for me. So I initially would say no, but I could maybe wrap my mind around 100K potentially. It would be definitely a few years down the line.
What is a recent book, TV show, movie, or podcast you've consumed that you think would be a good recommendation for the audience to check out?
Oh, man. I mean, this is slightly embarrassing, but I never read Harry Potter when I was younger, and so I just went through the whole series this past year. And I'm assuming everyone's read that, but it was a fun one for me to get into at this age.
I think that's a good call to action to reread the series, because I was a fanatic, 10, 20 years ago, but it's still amazing.
They were great. Yeah.
What's your favorite Harry Potter?
I think the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yep, I think 3 through 5 are the best.
Yeah.
What is the best advice you have ever received, and why?
I think I've definitely struggled in the past to not I guess the advice was just stay true to yourself, because I've in the athletic world, but also the world or outside world, I've been very influenced by what other people do, and acknowledging that you should do your own thing, do what you trust yourself, I guess. I found that to be super beneficial, and bringing that more into my training and just approach to everything basically is dial in what I need to do and learn from others, but definitely stick to what you know.
You may have already answered it with this next question, but if you could put a message on a billboard for all to see, what would it say and why?
Okay. Maybe a little bit different. I would say, stay humble. It's definitely something I strive to do, and I'm assuming I don't always pull off, but I always admire, others, and I really look up to people who are very humble within athletics and everything, and that's just always been a big goal of mine, because it's very inspiring. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Sophia, it has been a joy to have you on the podcast. We really appreciate your time. I think a lot of listeners are just becoming aware of you, and they're excited to follow your trajectory from here on out. I will make sure to link to all of your social media in the show notes, but is there anything else you want to leave the audience with, any things you're working on, any initiatives before we go?
I cannot think of anything, but thank you for having me. This was great.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll chat again soon in the future, and thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.